If what we've been told is true, then the New Orleans Saints need to make a decision at quarterback after Monday's game against Jacksonville. We're going to talk about why and answer your questions all on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, we're going to start off with training camp day 17 notes. Then we're going to take a look at why it is that the New Orleans Saints need to make their decision when it comes to the quarterback competition following the Jacksonville Jaguars game and not waiting much longer than that. Then we're going to get to your questions from YouTube as well as the Locked On Saints Facebook group, including biggest surprises, disappointments, and the UDFA with the best chance to make the roster throughout training camp so far. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, co-managing editor over at CanalStreetChronicles.com, and your Tuesday co-host over on the National Locked On NFL podcast. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day. All right, family, let's go ahead and get started with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Once again, thank you very much for joining us for another day here on the show. Want to talk a little bit first before we get to our lead story, Jameis and Taysom. Want to talk a bit more real quick just about training camp day 17, couple news and notes pieces that you need to know. If you want the in-depth analysis on what happened with practice, go to the folks that were there. Go and check out Amy Just as well as Luke Johnson over at NOLA.com. And of course, you can go and check out Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football and our folks over at The Athletic as well. Lots of great places to get your training camp day notes. But here are a couple of sort of the highlights that I just need, that I feel like are the most important that you should know. So Andrew Dowell, the linebacker that seems to be most firmly entrenched in a battle for the bottom of the linebacker depth chart, maybe the last spot on that linebacker depth chart with Chase Hansen, had what would have been a pick six in game action. Of course, they usually blow these plays dead and things like that in training camp, but didn't stop Andrew Dowell. He went ahead and took that one back to the house. So a big interception that he was able to get on Taysom Hill. Ken Crawley also had an interception that would have gone back for a pick six. I believe that one was on Jameis Winston. However, that one ended up getting called back. There were officials at practice and defensive holding on that play. Ken Crawley had maybe one of his weakest days in camp after having very strong outings over the course of all. So maybe something to continue to watch as New Orleans Saints get back to practice today. Now, speaking of today's practice, you'll notice that the New Orleans Saints aren't currently practicing. Those of you that are listening to this between the 9:30 to noon Central Time hours, that is because they have moved practice to 7 p.m. tonight, and they'll be practicing at the Caesars Superdome. All right, so I want to go now to our lead story for the day, because the rest of the training camp notes segment would really be spent talking about Jameis and Taysom, right? I mean, that's going to be always the biggest draw when it comes to any conversation around the New Orleans Saints up until a decision is made, and even after a decision is made between the two quarterbacks. But it's the decision that I want to talk about, not necessarily who's in the lead. Y'all know how I stand on that. It's a game to 21, and neither of them has won by 2 yet. But when it comes down to it, this decision has to be made. And in my opinion, and I think in a lot of opinions, I've had a lot of folks that have shared this with me before, that this decision being made following the Jacksonville Jaguars game is really as late as you can get in making this decision. Now, whether the decision is made privately within the organization or publicly is honestly irrelevant. But I do think that what we understand and what we've been told by the New Orleans Saints and by Sean Payton during one of his pressers is that they plan to treat the games 1, 2, and 3 during this preseason the same rhythm and the same way that they would treat games 1, 2, and 3 during a standard 4-game preseason, to where game 3 is usually your big dress rehearsals, where the starters go out, they play for a quarter, and for some teams they play for a half, and other teams they only play for a drive, but you get some type of a dress rehearsal with your starters in game 3, and then usually rest everybody game 4, and that game 4 was really about those guys that were trying to make the roster and that were fighting for a job. Unfortunately, game 4 doesn't exist anymore, so every team sort of has to make an evaluation of how they want to treat the final game of the preseason, which is now game 3. And for the New Orleans Saints, it sounds like what we've been told is that they plan to treat game 3 the way they've always treated game 3, which is more dress rehearsal than final chance for the guys that are trying to make the roster, if that makes sense. So with that being the case, if you want to treat game 3 as a dress rehearsal, then you have to know who your lead actor is, right? You got to know who to put in costume and put out in front of an audience for your dress rehearsal. So if that's going to be the case, there's my theater experience for you. But with that being the case, making the decision about the quarterback, whether it be Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston, you have to make that decision following the Jacksonville Jaguars game. Here's the good news for the New Orleans Saints, because I know a lot of folks have gotten a little bit sort of concerned around time. Is there going to be enough time to get the offense built around either one of these quarterbacks? You don't have to worry about that as much, because this offense doesn't really change in terms of the overall standard of what's going to be run based upon whether it's Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill. It's how the quarterbacks read the offense and the sort of sub packages, the sub portions of the playbook that end up getting swapped out. Taysom Hill, you get a sub portion of the playbook for design runs at the quarterback position. If it's Jameis Winston, then you potentially get a sub package of the playbook that is about Taysom Hill being utilized as a Y, as a third tight end, as a player in the backfield. So you get that sort of offensive weapon playbook that he gets to slip into, basically, which isn't really a fresh piece of the playbook. It's just about getting him into the plays where Jameis Winston is the quarterback and then lining him up in place of an F, lining him up in place of a Z or a Y. That's usually the way that this should work. So really, it's just the one sub-package of the playbook about the designed runs that is the difference between these two quarterbacks. Otherwise, the offense is majority the same. And I think that that's what gives the Saints the opportunity to not have had to make this decision before training camp and get an install built around the quarterback over the course of training camp. They could work both of these quarterbacks into their system and find out which one's going to run the system best. And with the timeline being as it is, if you make the decision following that Jaguars game on Monday, even internally without announcing it publicly, you get the game prep week up to the Cardinals preseason game. You get the week off, which is the new thing. Instead of there being a preseason game in between preseason 3 and week 1 of the regular season, you just have a week off during that time. So you've got the lead up to game prep for the Cardinals' final preseason game, the week off, and then the lead up in game week going up to the week 1 game against the Green Bay Packers. So you don't really lose time if you were to be making this decision in previous years following the second preseason game. It's the same timeline. You still have 3 weeks in between second preseason game and first regular season game. So that's where it works in their benefit. But I do think that they should make this decision based upon what they see in both of these preseason games and training camp after that Jacksonville Jaguars game. Maybe you get into a little bit further into camp and see if you find some of the adjustments that you're looking for. But this Monday against the Jacksonville Jaguars could be these quarterbacks' last opportunity to put their best foot forward, finish touching up their resume, put the last, sort of selling point in their cover letter, and turn it into the New Orleans Saints to apply for the job of starting quarterback in 2021. All right, y'all, coming up next, we're going to start getting to your questions from the Locked On Saints Facebook group, as well as YouTube comments and anybody that reached out via Twitter as well. We got a bunch of great questions. We're going to start off with a look at stat projections for Juwan Johnson as a tight end. Then later on, we're going to get to biggest surprises, disappointments, and the UDFA during training camp with the best opportunity to make the roster so far. We'll hit all of that and much more as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. All right, y'all, I tell you about it all the time. Limited edition flavors over for Built Bar over at Built.com. Go and check them out. There's a pistachio flavor right now. I'm a huge pistachio fan. I know it's an acquired taste sometimes. I know it's not always a thing. It's a little bit of a controversial flavor, but I love it. Y'all know me. I don't like my ranch, but I loves me some pistachio. Ice cream, protein bar like this that's covered 100% chocolate. Harder to not sell me on it than it is to sell me on it. But if pistachio is not your thing, don't worry, because Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar out on the market, also has 9 incredible flavors that are always there for you. You like coconut and chocolate, coconut, as well as coconut almond, basically Mounds or Almond Joy, whatever it is that you want. They've also got a mint brownie if you're into that. They've got peanut butter brownie. You like really sweet, you can go salted caramel, cookies and cream even. And even though they sound super sweet, you're only looking at 4 or 5 grams of sugar, 4 or 5 grams of net carbs, but 17, 18 grams of protein and anywhere between 130 to just 180 calories. So go and check these things out. They're incredible. Go and see them over at Built.com. And don't forget to do yourself a little bit of a favor as well. Use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off over at Built.com. All right, Who Dat Nation, we are continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We want to get to your questions from both the Locked On Saints Facebook group, and we got some great ones from YouTube as well. I'm going to start off with our good friend Tess over on YouTube. Who did the Saints cut to get Lawrence Woods back on the team? Tess and I, big fans of Lawrence Woods. We want to see Lawrence Woods back on. I don't know who they need to cut, but I just know they need to open up another roster spot and get homeboy back because I still think he would be a beast as a gunner. So apparently I'm wrong. Otherwise, he'd still be on the team, but I still feel really good about him in terms of what I've seen on tape. So I would love to see Lawrence Woods back with the New Orleans Saints. His time's not done yet. There's still a chance he cleared waivers. Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Maybe he gets to have a little bit of those, one of those JT Barrett. Who is going to be the JT Barrett of this year? Who's going to be the person that's going back and forth from practice squad to off the roster to practice squad? That'll be something to watch because the person that it was last year is no longer on the practice squad, I think. So that'll be really interesting to see. Who's going to be that person? Let's talk to Lil J real quick, who wants to know, why wouldn't the Saints target KJ Wright? Now, KJ Wright is a linebacker that I thought that the New Orleans Saints would have gotten all over. He does a little bit of everything. He's a good pass rusher. He's good in run support. He plays well in coverage, carries tight ends up the seam, does all the things that you look for a linebacker, but maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that because you'll notice not only have the New Orleans Saints not signed KJ Wright, nobody has signed KJ Wright at this time, not a single team. So with that being the case, you wonder if there's something else here to where either things aren't looking the way they need to be looking, if there's a concern around his age at 32 years old, particularly for the New Orleans Saints who are working on developing young talent. And I also think the Saints have done a good job addressing the linebacker position, even though they didn't go out there and spend any time with KJ Wright. They brought Quan Alexander back, who, by the way, I know I didn't hit it in the practice notes because I wanted to come to it here. Quan Alexander reportedly has looked incredible so far during camp. And so his recovery timeline has just been obliterated by his dedication to getting back. And it's an incredible thing to see. Maybe we get to see him on Monday. I'm not going to get my hopes up around that. I'll look to maybe the Arizona Cardinals preseason game or maybe even early on in the NFL season. We'll have to see if he's even ready for week 1. We don't know yet, but he's already participating in team drills now and making plays as well. So keep an eye out on that because we might be seeing Quan Alexander, if I can borrow a phrase from Sean Payton, sooner rather than later. So I do think the Saints have flipped that linebacker position. It went from being a massive hole next to Demario Davis to, with the play of Quan Alexander returning, with Zac Bond really ascending the way that he has so far. Pete Werner's looking good in camp, even though we haven't seen him since the beginning of August, unfortunately, but he did look good in camp when he was there. Guys like Chase Hansen, Caden Ellis continue to make plays. Andrew Dowell's fighting for his spot. All of a sudden, this linebacker position has kind of done a little bit of a 180, and it's looking like one of the stronger units across the team. So let's take a look now over with our Locked On Saints Facebook group. We're going to go to my good friend Tomaz, who asked for a stat projection for Juwan Johnson in 2021. Now, a lot of folks are going to be disappointed in me here because here I have been sort of questioning Juwan Johnson's ability to be able to transition over to tight end. He proved me very wrong there. He's done a phenomenal job there and deserves all the credit in the world. And I've tried to give him all of that credit here over the last couple of weeks, especially as we've seen him start to dominate the transition. But now I'm going to go back. I'm going to kind of be a little bit reserved in my stat projection. I'm going to go 25 yards, 25 catches. I'm not going to be that disrespectful. 25 catches, 268 yards, so a little bit over 10 yards per catch and 4 touchdowns, most of which coming in the red zone. The reason why I only give him 25 catches and that many yards is because I imagine that he's going to be someone that's going to be utilized pretty close to the line of pretty close to the goal line. So he'll be a red zone target. So you don't get a lot of, even though you have a big impact, you don't get a lot of yardage. You don't get a lot of numbers from there, except for the touchdowns. So if he could walk away with 4 or 5 red zone touchdowns during 2021, that makes him a better tight end 1 in terms of scores, tight end 2 in terms of scores than what you saw from Josh Hill over the most recent years. No shade to Josh Hill, who's been outstanding in his role, but as somebody being able to score in the red zone, the Saints still consistently look for that person. Perhaps Juwan Johnson at the tight end position, in addition to Adam Troutman, can do that. I think Adam Troutman is going to be the one that's going to bring in the most targets, though. So that's why I have only about 25 catches for Juwan Johnson, because he'll have a specialized role. But then I still expect him to average more than 10 yards per catch, because every now and then he's going to, grab a catch over the middle in a 4-vert situation where he's bending inside, or he's going to get a catch up the seam. And we know he runs so fluidly that he should have the opportunity to pick up yards after catch. So he'll be good for a few big plays around, the shot areas of the field, close to the 50, things like that. but the majority of his usage coming in the red zone would make a lot of sense to me. Next, we're going to go to Fernando Albino, who asked about when we're going to hear about Marshawn Lattimore and Deontay Harris's suspensions. I'm going to be really, really honest with you. The true answer to this question, unfortunately, is I have no idea. Particularly Marshawn Lattimore's. Marshawn Lattimore's is a bit of an interesting case because it's not even moving really right now in terms of the local government of Ohio and Cleveland where the arrest took place. So that one, I don't know. That's feeling like a little bit of an anomaly to me. But when it comes down to Deontay Harris, there's at least a little bit of a proven timeline in terms of the comparison that we can have with a recent New Orleans Saint that dealt with this same type of situation. PJ Williams, a couple days after the NFC Championship game loss back in the 2019 calendar year, the 2018 NFL season, he ended up with a DUI or a DWI during that time. So that happened in January 2019. He didn't get his guilty plea in court until August, and then the NFL didn't suspend him until October 15th. So it took from January when the incident happened to 10 months later in October for that suspension to actually take place. If that's going to be the case, this arrest for Deontay Harris happened in July. That would mean that 10 months later, you're looking at what, May? So I don't really know what to expect in terms of the timeline here. I think it's going to be probably a little bit more accelerated than the PJ Williams situation, but it can only move as quickly as it does in the court of the law. And then after that, the NFL will do its sort of, additional look at everything. So I don't know. I think it just depends on how quickly it moves in terms of court of the law, and then we'll find out about it. It's possible that this happens just like with PJ Williams, where it doesn't happen to begin a season, but it happens at some point during the season, which could be detrimental for the New Orleans Saints unless it happens after Michael Thomas comes back. That could be maybe the quote-unquote best case scenario here, if you will, but we just don't know. I have no idea. It's one of the reasons why I haven't taken Deontay Harris off of the depth chart, because he could potentially start with the Saints at the beginning of the season, but then be suspended halfway through the season or something like that. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. But according to the timeline with PJ Williams, it's worth just keeping in mind that this could take up to like 10 months before we have any type of a resolution out of it. All right, and finally, a quick one here from Charles Bell Jr., who wants to know how much the New Orleans Saints rely on the run game if Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill don't completely and clearly separate themselves from one another. The fact of the matter is, honestly, Charles, I think that the New Orleans Saints are going to focus on the run game no matter what. That's going to be a big part of this offense, regardless of 2019. Did I just go back in time? In 2021, excuse me. So I think Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, potentially Tony Jones Jr. could end up being, the workhorses for this Saints offense, particularly early on while they don't have Michael Thomas, and the passing game might start off a little bit shaky once they go up against, starting talent across the NFL. We'll have to see how all of that plays out. But regardless of how much one of these quarterbacks proves themselves or anything like that, the benefit of this team is that you don't have to lean entirely on the quarterback to win you games, because you have a run game, and it's looking like they have a really good, or at least a better defense than we expected. We're going to talk more about that defense because Michael Murray wants to know if we should be concerned about the offensive line because of how good the defensive line has been playing so far during camp. But we're going to talk about why you don't need to be concerned about the offensive line and much more as we continue on with your questions here on today's episode of Locked On Saints. And if you're feeling as good about the New Orleans Saints, potentially even better than I feel about the New Orleans Saints, you can go and check out BetOnline.ag, bet on the total win totals for the New Orleans Saints, and also projected order of finish as well when it comes to the division. But if you want to go beyond that when it comes to the football season, there's so much more that they have going on as well. Let me take a look at this here. They have the biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest that's going on right now, the world's largest $200,000 NFL survival contest that you can get in on. There's also an option for you to get in, place a bet on the opening Thursday night game against between the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it's a little bit risk-free because if you don't win, you can get as much as $25 back on that bet. So go and check them out. Right now, if you sign up, you get a 100% welcome bonus over on the site as well as a brand new user. So go and check them out. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Want to dive right into Michael Murray's question. He's mentioned that I've been talking good about the defensive line for quite a while. Does that mean that we should be concerned about the offensive line? Let me tell you why you don't need to be concerned about the New Orleans Saints offensive line. First of all, you're seeing a lot of veteran rests along the offensive line, including guys like, for instance, of course, Teron Armstead, who's been getting some veteran rests every now and then. Ryan Ramczyk returned on Thursday after missing 2 days of practice. So with all of that, some of the things that you're seeing in training camp have to do with competition level. And as we've discussed here on the show before, traits-based evaluation is more important than competition level always, but sometimes the traits-based evaluation will also lead to wins against the lesser guys that don't have their own traits that are really standing out and helping them from a natural talent side. And in addition to that, you'll remember that we had Todd Graffinini here on the show not long ago, and he talked about how they're trading wins on the offensive and defensive lines. So I'm not too worried about the offensive line because once you have that starting unit there and together, they are one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in the NFL. I think the other two reasons why we talk up the defensive line so much is because they obliterated the Ravens' offensive line during that preseason game, and also because the expectation was getting low for the defensive line. I mean, a lot of people were down on Marcus Davenport. People were concerned about Cam Jordan. People weren't sure about Peyton Turner. And so for the edge rushers, for a lot of folks, they were really down on where the pressure would come from. As in terms of the defensive line, or the interior defense. Oh, and by the way, they also lost Trey Hendrickson, who had 13.5 sacks last season. On the interior, you had lost Sheldon Rankins. The Saints also traded away Malcolm Brown. You had David Onyemata, but he's serving a 6-game suspension to open up the season. So there wasn't a lot of knowledge around guys like Malcolm Brown, Shai Tuttle, Jalen Dalton, Christian Ringo, Albert Huggins, who they signed, Josiah Bronson, the undrafted free agent that they brought in, RJ McIntosh, who they just signed. These guys don't have a big reputation because there wasn't a large sample size of them. So I think that's another thing, is that they are sort of overcoming and outperforming or overperforming their evaluation on a large scale, based upon what the expectation was in terms of who they were going to be and what they were going to look like on that defensive line. So I think that's the other reason why we talk so highly of them, is that they're outperforming expectation. I want to go to Michael Koger's question here. It's three parts. Who is the biggest surprise? What is the biggest disappointment? And who is the undrafted free agent so far? All of which having to do with training camp. So let's start with biggest surprise of training camp so far. And I'm actually going to name three here. Ken Crawley has been a big surprise. He has been outstanding in camp so far. I think we all remember his 2018 season more readily than we remember his 2017 season, where he had a very nice 2017, but then he allowed a 140-plus passer rating in 2018, and it kind of all fell off a cliff for him. So I think that that's probably the Ken Crawley that we remember so much. That is not the Ken Crawley that I see in camp, or that I saw in camp. And that is not the Ken Crawley that we continue to be notified about in camp, although he did have a down day on Thursday. So keep an eye out in terms of his performance for Friday night. Is he able to bounce back from that when his confidence might have taken a hit? Because confidence was a big issue for Ken Crawley. So we might be about to learn a lot more about Ken Crawley than we actually do. Paulson Adebo will also throw into that category, by the way, as somebody that has been surprising, but is not the surprise of camp so far. The other surprise is Juwan Johnson. I'm going to keep giving dude his credit because his transition over to tight end, he's just completely blown it out of the water. He's dominating that transition. Zac Bond is the last one that I'll mention there for biggest surprise. He's just been absolutely outstanding. And it's all Michael Hodges. That's the thing that's kind of crazy about it, is that like when it was Mike Nolan, you might have already known, all right, this could work out because Mike Nolan is a proven entity, right? Michael Hodges, this is his first time as a linebacker coach in the NFL and has done an incredible job. I mean, an outstanding job with the linebackers that you saw on the field last year. And then now you look at the development of Zac Bond, that's Michael Hodges, and that's really, really great. If you have a player development focus at all three levels of the defense, that is a humongous win for the New Orleans Saints and for New Orleans Saints fans who get to watch this team every year. Because Ryan Nielsen, assuming he doesn't get hired away after this year, Ryan Nielsen is a developer. He's an evaluator. He does a phenomenal job with young talent on the defensive line. Chris Richard, same thing in the secondary. If you now have that with Michael Hodges, who seems to have a natural sort of talent with this, that's a humongous win for this team. So a storyline that we don't talk about enough, honestly, is the coaching over on the defensive side, and something that we'll continue to really highlight and talk about, particularly as we go through the regular season. Okay, biggest disappointment for me. I don't really have a player that's the biggest disappointment because I kind of keep realistic expectations about everybody, but we haven't seen any quarterback challenges. I was hoping we were going to see quarterback challenges this year, and I get it. Jameis, Taysom, I understand. You're in the middle of a quarterback competition already, so there's no need to have quarterback competitions and quarterback challenges for the fans, but you know what? You do. I want them. Give them back. Give them. So that's my big thing. That's my biggest disappointment because I love those. I thought those were a lot of fun, and I expected Drew Brees to return for one and stuff like that. Maybe we get one during that week off in between the preseason and the regular season. I understand why. I really and truly do. But I just needed to complain about that for a moment. And then finally, the undrafted free agent that I think is most likely to make the roster. Right now, Bryce Thompson has done himself some favors. He did drop an interception on Thursday, but you know what? You're a defensive back. You're not expected to catch 100% of these things. It would be great if you did, but you're not expected to catch 100% of these things. So he might have hurt himself a little bit on Thursday, but had that really nice interception against the Baltimore Ravens in preseason game 1. We'll see what happens in preseason game 2. He's had a solid camp so far. I also had Josiah Bronson there too. He had a sack on Thursday's practice and has been somebody that has consistently shown up. And there might be a need for a guy there on the interior. And to wrap up today's show, I want to get to one more question here, because this is a question that I am getting from a ton of people, and it's why haven't the New Orleans Saints signed a kicker yet? And the fact of the matter is, I don't know why, but I also feel that they don't need to be in a rush, because to me, more than likely, any kicker that they sign at this point is not guaranteed to be the starting kicker in place of Will Lutz to open up the season. I think they're going to look to see who are the players that are on rosters right now that get cut, that they could go and grab after the preseason. But the Saints did work out 3 kickers over the course of this last day. I believe it was just on Thursday. Aldrick Rosas, former New York Giant that they brought in. Alex Kessman, who is an undrafted free agent rookie kicker from Pitt. And then Dominic Ellerbe, who's an undrafted free agent rookie kicker from Utah State, but did spend some time with the Las Vegas Raiders opening preseason weekend. He was waived August 17th, so just a few days before his workout with the New Orleans Saints. Now, Dominic Ellerbe, 79% over at Utah State. When it comes to Pitt's kicker, Alex Kessman, he was around 72 or so percent, only 66% beyond 50. And probably the most impressive performance that you've seen by any of these kickers came back in 2018 when it comes to Aldrick Rosas, who ended up making 32 of 33 field goals that season, including 4 of 5 from 50 plus, and then was perfect between 40 and 49. So he was basically 10 of 11 over 40 yards. So he had a great season in 2018, hasn't had that type of consistency, that 97% average that year, which he actually beat Will Lutz in terms of Pro Bowl nomination that year, because Will Lutz had performed out of control, but he performed out of control-er than Will Lutz, I guess you could say. But, he's also had some recent legal issues as well with a hit-and-run DUI that he had, I believe it was a year or 2 years ago. But he was in the NFL in 2019 and in 2020. He ended up with a 70.6% field goal percentage in 2019, 72.7% in 2020. So neither great years since that 97% season. So still a ton for the New Orleans Saints to figure out at the kicker position. Still something to figure out at the quarterback position. We're going to talk about every position, though, that you need to be following when we come back on Monday with our preview before Monday night's New Orleans Saints, Jacksonville Jaguars preseason game 2. We'll talk about players to watch. We'll talk about players who need to step up and who have something to prove and earn on that day. And then, of course, we'll talk about keys to victory, a lot of the fun stuff as well. So I appreciate y'all, as always, for being here. Much more on the way as we continue on 5 days a week here at Locked On Saints. Thank you very much for all of your support. And as always, for everything in between these episodes, you can find me on Twitter at RossJackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.